Alrighty, let's get into cognitive development in infancy. Basically, this chapter is kind of where a lot of things start to really kind of go off the rails a little bit, I guess, if you want to call it that. We're going to talk about some pretty complicated topics, if you will. This chapter tends to be the one that really gets a lot of students a lot of trouble, but it's really not that hard. It's just kind of complicated, and there's a lot of things that kind of sound alike that really aren't, and where they do differ, they differ from a very, very small perspective. So they seem very similar, but they're really not, and it's very, very important that you kind of keep that in mind and be able to identify and differentiate between these things. It'll make a little bit more sense when we get there, and we'll kind of walk through it. And as always, if you guys have any questions, shoot me an email if something's not coming through. If you don't understand something, you need me to clarify or go over it again, then I will certainly be able to do that. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to assume that everyone is good. So hopefully you guys are staying safe out there, and nothing's coming out to get you with COVID wise. But anyway, let's get down to it here. All right. So basic principles of cognitive development. Our early experience is more important than later ones. So when you kind of look at this pretty general question, it's very important that you keep in mind that there are really kind of two schools of thought on influence of experiences on development. There's the school of thought that earlier experiences, things that happen to you very, very early on in your development, have the most impact, and later experiences really don't play that big of a deal. And then there's the school of thought that later experiences can also help influence development. They may not be more important than earlier ones, but they are certainly just as important. And early experiences, might play one role to, either help development or hurt it. But that doesn't mean that an individual who, perhaps has a very troubled early life, doesn't really need to go through the rest of their life harboring that shortcoming. That later experiences later on in life, perhaps when you're 8 or 10 or 15, they can help kind of make up for that deficit. So things like adoption, people who students, kids who get adopted early on, they might feel that initial rejection from their parents, but and that might be something that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. Or it might be something that, should they get adopted into a warm, nurturing, loving home, then all of that previous feelings of neglect and abandonment, those can kind of be overcome. And they can, the shortcomings don't have to be absolutely permanent and set in stone. So we'll talk a little bit more about these here in just a second. Okay. Some psychologists believe that unless infants experience warm, nurturing caregiving in the first year or so of life, they will not develop to their first full potential. This is basically kind of the early experiences are everything. What happens to us, first kind of lays the foundation of development and what the personality and what the child will ultimately become. And all things being equal, if someone does not experience that warm, nurturing caregiving early on in life, then kind of a poorer foundation is laid, and every experience and everything kind of goes on top of that shoddy foundation, and all things being equal, they will not rise to their full potential. This, of course, has some positive aspects to it. It has some things that make a little bit of sense. If it's certainly much better to have that warm, nurturing, loving, fulfilling caregiving throughout the entire course of your life. But again, there's kind of two schools of thought, two competing or warring factions, if you will, within developmental psychology. That so some people say the early experiences are everything, and that's kind of the foundation on which everything else is built. And if the foundation isn't strong, then the entire structure isn't strong. And then there's those in the other camp that say, well, that's not necessarily true. You can build a very, very fine, very, very sound building, and just because the foundation isn't completely top notch, then that doesn't mean that everything else can't be structurally sound and kind of make up for that deficit. None of us have really ideal or perfect lives. We might consider ourselves to be happy or something like that, but that doesn't mean that we have kind of achieved the gold medal, the gold standard of what it means to be kind of scientifically and developmentally secure. None of us are really perfect, and none of us have really experienced the ideal childhood of whatever that may or may not be. So although early experiences are very, very important, that doesn't mean that they're going to supersede the experiences that happen later on. So anyway, this kind of the guys in the camp of early experiences are everything, and if you don't get that warm, nurturing caregiving within that very narrow window of opportunity, then all things being equal, they won't kind of measure up to their full success. This is called the early experience doctrine, and it suggests that after a period of early development, we become relatively fixed and permanent in our makeup. So again, you have this very, very narrow window of opportunity for developmental greatness, if you will. And if you don't get it within that window of time, the first couple of years, then that the foundation is shot, and anything built on top of that foundation is shot, and you will not develop to your fullest potential. You're kind of operating at almost really kind of a deficit, if you will. In contrast, these are the guys in the other camp. Some psychologists emphasize the power of later development and liken development in later years to the ebb and flow of a river. This is called the later experience doctrine, and its advocates argue that children are responsive to change and that sensitive caregiving is just as important later as it is earlier. They believe that too little attention is given to adult development, arguing that although early experiences are important contributors to development, they are not more important than later ones. So, early experience doctrine, early experiences are everything. They are much more important than later ones. You kind of take that and build on top of that, and every experience you have, kind of becomes something new, and you kind of meld and mesh all of those things. But the ones you get at the very beginning are really kind of going to point and direct where your development is headed. Later experience doctrine guys concede that early experiences are very, very important, but they're not more important than later ones. So that's a very, very important distinction that I want you guys to make and have when we're talking about these kind of these two camps, these two schools of thought. All right, now we get to Piaget. Piaget again is where a lot of things kind of go off the rails and get a little bit confusing. But don't freak out when you start studying for this stuff. It's not really that hard. It's just it requires a great deal of explanation. And once Piaget kind of clicks, and you kind of come to the understanding that yes, this does make a little bit of sense, then it's really not that hard, and you can kind of begin to wrap your mind around what it is he was talking about. Around the mid-1900s, a Swiss developmental psychologist named Jean Piaget changed the way we think about children's minds. In Piaget's views, children use what are called schemas to make sense of what they experience. According to Piaget, a schema, or a scheme, is a mental structure or concept that organizes the information and provides a structure for interpreting it. Okay, schemas. A good way to kind of think about schemas and think about kind of the mind in general, according to Piaget, is that imagine your mind is kind of this filing cabinet. And everything you know and everything you've ever experienced, every category of every single thing that you know what it is all housed within this, master filing cabinet of the mind. Okay? A schema is the individual folders within that filing cabinet. And each folder contains a set of descriptions, a set of designs, if you will, of what that particular thing is. So you have a schema for computer, and you have a schema for lamp, and you have a schema for pen, and you have a schema for car, and you have a schema for girl, and you have a schema for couch and television. Everything you've ever experienced, everything that you know what it is, you have a schema for, a folder within the filing cabinet of your mind. So each individual thing that you know what it is, chair and desk and dog and horse and hippopotamus and everything else, has its own individual schema, its own individual file within this giant master filing cabinet of your mind. Okay? Now, what you put into these individual schemas are sheets of paper, if you want to run with this kind of filing cabinet metaphor. Each individual thing that you have ever experienced, each individual example of what you have experienced goes into each individual schema file. Bear with me, this is going to make a lot more sense here in just a second. So let's go with dog, for example. Dog would be a schema within your vast knowledge of everything that you know. So you're going to take a file folder, and you're going to write dog on the little tab. That is your new schema for dog. You have now created a place to store every single example of dog that you've ever heard of, you've ever seen, you've ever watched on television, you've ever seen a picture of, you've ever petted. Every dog you've ever come in contact with is now going to go into this individual schema, this individual file that you have marked dog. So your dog at home, the dogs on television, the dogs you see walking in the park, every single dog that you've ever seen and experienced is going to go into this file folder of dog. And that file folder is your schema, is your way of categorizing and grouping individual things and differentiating one thing from another. So each of these pieces of paper, every example or every instance that you've come across of dog, those are called exemplars. An exemplar is, it might be your dog at home, and it might be the dog you saw, walking to the park today, or it might be a dog that you see, in the next car over, while you're sitting at a stoplight. It might be dogs you've seen on television. Every single dog you've ever seen has its own individual piece of paper in your dog folder, your dog schema. So the more experience you have with dogs, the broader and more general that schema folder of dog becomes, and the wider and more stuff you have to put in it. So kind of keep that in mind when we get to assimilation and accommodation. This is gonna come back, and we're gonna kind of take this idea of dogs and folders and things like that, and we're gonna kind of take it up a notch. All right, so that is schemas. Schemas are the individual folders within the compartment of your mind, and you use those to kind of divide and differentiate different things that you know, that you've ever experienced, and that you actually know what they are. A psychologist embraced his views that children actively construct their cognitive world as they go through a series of stages. So Piaget had individual stages that he thought that each really child is going to go through, and each of these divisions, each of these levels, if you will. And we're going to talk about Piaget stages here after we get done with schemas and assimilation, accommodation, and all that. But these stages, these steps that we all go through in our development, are kind of demarcated and marked by certain abilities and certain things, certain ways that we use to see the world. Again, this is going to make a lot more sense. Piaget is really kind of a student's worst nightmare in developmental psychology. Yeah, definitely, he's probably the most difficult part of this entire class. So let's just hit him running, and we'll get through it as painlessly as possible, hopefully. So just know that Piaget had kind of set up these individual stages that each of us have to go through, and we have to kind of go through them in order, and we're going to talk about them later. Piaget said that two processes are responsible for how people use and adapt their schemas. So there are two ways that we use schemas to gain information about the world, gain knowledge about the world, and how we categorize and learn new things. The first is assimilation, and the second is accommodation. All right, assimilation occurs when individuals incorporate new information into their already existing knowledge. They're going to adapt the novel environment or stimulus into their already existing schema. So here's an example. Let's go back to dogs. Dogs is a good example. So let's say you have my dog is probably sitting right behind me. I don't know if you can see her or not, but she's a Chihuahua. So let's say that you're a 2-year-old kid, and the only dog you've ever seen or ever come in contact with is your Chihuahua at home. So you might ask Mom, what is this? And she says, oh, that's our dog, blah blah blah. This is Jake or Henry or whatever his name is. And so you're going to now form a new schema. Okay, you're going to label it dog, and now you're going to put a picture of your dog, the Chihuahua, brown Chihuahua, whatever, inside the schema for dog. Now, your dog schema is exactly one exemplar wide. The only dogs that you know of are the ones right here in your house. It's the first dog you ever come in contact with. You built your schema around that. As far as you're concerned, this is the only dog on planet Earth. All right. So let's say that we, take little Johnny out for a walk in his stroller, and we strap him in, and we go out the door, and we lock the door, and we turn around, and we start walking down the path, and all of a sudden, Johnny sees a Saint Bernard walking up the other side of the street. Johnny might look at that and go, wow, what is that? That doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. And Mom says, well, that's a dog. So now Johnny has exactly 2 exemplars in his schema. And as you become more developed and more general knowledge about the world, the more instances of each thing you come in contact with, the easier it is to identify that this also should belong in this particular schema. So you do this using something called prototypes. So once you learn that the dog at your house has 4 legs, a tail, 2 ears, a long snout, they bark, they have fur, etc., 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 they're brown, then you can kind of, anything that you see from that point on that kind of resembles that prototype of what you have come to know as dog, you can also label as dog and put in your dog schema. So now you come across this Saint Bernard. You've never seen a Saint Bernard before. It doesn't look anything like the dog that you know of, the little Chihuahua at home. And so you have no idea what that is, and you might ask Mama, what is that? And Mama's going to say, well, that's a dog. So now you have a picture of Saint Bernards. Let's say it's a white Saint Bernard with 4 legs and 2 ears, etc., 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 a tail, and you're going to put that in your schema. Now, if you see a German Shepherd walking down the road, and it might be the same color, it might have 4 legs, a tail, ears, you might say, hey, is that a dog? And Mama's going to go, yes, that's a dog. Very good, Johnny. Yay, you're so smart. Johnny has just now assimilated Saint Bernard and German Shepherd into his already existing schema of dog. So he's going to adapt his schema, his knowledge of dog, to also include Saint Bernards and German Shepherds. Okay? That is assimilation. Again, please let me know if this does not make any sense. All right, Piaget he's just rough. All right, so that's assimilation. When when you go dog to dog to dog to dog to dog, and you learn to identify dogs based on their prototypes, based on their similar characteristics. Now let's say you're walking down the street, you're about 5 years old, and you see a dog with 3 legs, and his tail is bobbed, and he's kind of hobbling a little bit. That doesn't look like any dog you've ever seen before. Now this one has 3 legs. Every dog you've ever seen before has 4 legs. So you might ask Mama, what is that? That doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. And Mom says, well, that's also a dog. When you say, well, it only has 3 legs. I've never seen a dog with 3 legs. And Mom says, well, sometimes dogs can have 3 legs or no tail or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes they can be, yellow or red or brown or black. The color, it doesn't really matter when it comes to dogs. And so now you've got 4 exemplars in your dog schema, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the more dogs you come in contact, the more deviations from your prototype that you have, and the easier it is to identify other dogs in the future. Okay? So again, the prototype you have is kind of that picture in your mind that comes up whenever you think of the word dog, or you think of the word telephone, or you think of the word car. That is your prototype, and you're going to compare every single instance of everything you've ever come across from now until the day you die against the prototypes, and you're going to kind of find that thing that is most similar. So you're going to see something, a phone. And you're going to go, look through all of your previous examples of phone, and if there's, if it's very similar to that, then you might start to look at the form and the function and see what it does, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that makes it that much easier to be able to identify phones in the future. So it helps to kind of have this rich, broad network of experiences and things that you've come in contact with, your exposure, so that you can help and more easily identify and assimilate new things that you come in contact with, and you're able to figure out what exactly they are, and you're able to categorize those much, much more efficiently. All right, so that's assimilation. Okay, accommodation occurs when individuals adjust their schemas to the environment. When you change your schema to accommodate this new thing that you've come in contact with. Okay? So, let's say that you have your dog schema. You know that all dogs, or every dog that you've ever had, has 4 legs. It has, a tail. It has a head and ears and eyes and a long nose. And, they might be brown or yellow or black or red or whatever. And so you might be in the car one day and you're driving along and you pass a pasture on the way to school. And there's, 15 or 20 cows out there. You might look out the window and go, ooh, dog. Well, it looks like, every other dog you've ever seen. Why would this one be any different? And Mama says, no, Johnny, that's not a dog, that's a cow. So now you have to adjust your schema set to now create a new schema for cow. And you have to differentiate cow from dog. And cows are bigger than dogs. Cows eat grass, cows moo, they don't bark, etc., etc., etc. So you learn to differentiate your exemplars for cow from your exemplars from dog. Even though they share some similarities, they are not the same. And so you have now just accommodated what you have come in contact with, this living, big, breathing, 4-legged thing in front of you. You've now accommodated that it is not a dog, it is a cow. So you've created a new cow schema, and that cow schema is now 15 or 20 or 50 or however many cows are out there wide. You've now seen, your first example of cow, and you've had to differentiate that it is not a dog. And so you are kind of adapting your dog schema to not include cows. Cats, hippopotamus, whatever. You have to do this for every single thing that you ever come in contact with. Not only do you have to know what it is, you have to know what it is not. And sometimes, things come up that we're not able to either assimilate or accommodate. Sometimes weird things wash up on the beach, and, scientists have no idea what to do, and they take a picture of it and post that picture, and all of us are going, wow, what the hell is that? That doesn't look like anything we've ever seen before. What is this? Is this an animal? Is it dead? Is it, an alien? We have no idea. We haven't yet come in contact with anything that resembles that closely enough for us to be able to either accommodate or assimilate this new thing into our expanding base of knowledge. And so we pretty much have to assimilate this very new thing that we've never seen before into something new. And so we have to create a brand new schema, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're kind of a little more cautious on that because we don't know if it's something that we already know. So we might miscategorize that as something new that we've never had an experience with, when in fact it's something that we see every day. You guys ever seen those pictures on the internet where they'll show something very familiar but at 10,000 magnification or whatever, and it looks completely different? It's still something that you know of, but it's just from a vastly different perspective. And so we, again, because we've never experienced that thing in that perspective, we have trouble kind of categorizing what that is. So we may falsely create a new folder for it, a new schema for this, when in fact it should have been assimilated into your already existing schema of whatever that picture is. It's just of a different way of looking at it. If you've never stared at your face for a very long time, or stared at your name, or stared at a word, and just really looked at it for a long time, and kind of you learn to kind of see things in a new way, and things start to look kind of strange, even something as familiar as your own name, because we never really take the time or the effort to really look at things. We just kind of give everything a cursory glance and a once over to quickly make sense of the world around us. We don't really sit there and look at things really hard and notice everything about it. And when you start to look at your face, or you look at your name, or something that's very familiar, that you've seen 1,000 times, it starts to kind of change a little bit. And you start to notice things, and you start to wonder, is this really my name? And the deeper you kind of go down that rabbit hole, you start to, again, notice exactly how the letters come together, and how they match up against each other, and what it really looks like from a very practiced and a very intense viewing, if you will. And this is, a lot of people who study art and look at art for a long time, this is, again, kind of what they do. And it's, they say, it's like I've never seen it before, or I saw something different this time, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, if you really start to pay attention to the world around you, then you'll notice that things are not always how you might have thought they were. Because again, we're so quick to get from one thing to another that we really don't stop and take the time to notice things very intently. And so you can kind of play this game with your mind and start to really look at things differently. Just try it. If you don't believe me, just write your name on a piece of paper, or type it out on your computer, and just sit there and look at it for a couple of minutes, and it will start to take on this almost otherworldly sense, and it'll start to kind of feel a little bit unfamiliar. It's really hard to explain. If you've ever done that, and you've ever kind of really looked at things, and you've kind of made that, your mind has kind of made that flip, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So just that you can kind of play with your assimilation and accommodation. You can kind of play with your perception of things, and really look at things from a very different way than you're normally used to. And that's kind of really what Piaget was really interested in, what he was really going for. All right, so that's assimilation and accommodation. Again, if that doesn't make any sense, please, again, let me know. This is a very important concept to developmental psychology, especially cognitive psychology and things like that. So you will see Piaget again if you choose to major in psychology or anything like that. He will come up again and again and again and again. He's really important. Piaget further stated that we go through 4 distinct stages of understanding the world. Give me a second. 4 distinct stages of understanding the world, and that each of these stages is age-related and consists of distinct ways of thinking. So now we're kind of coming back to Piaget's 4 stages, and how that is used kind of almost as a level So as we get older, as we become more developmentally experienced, we can level up, if you will. He said it's not simply knowing more information that takes a child from one stage to the next. Rather, it is a different way of understanding the world, a different way of looking at the world, a different way of seeing, and different perspectives. Kind of a little bit, just what we were just talking about. All right, the first stage is the sensory motor stage. This happens from around birth to around 2 years of age. Understandings come from coordinating sensory experiences or sensations with physical actions. So they'll reach up. They want to touch everything. They want to put everything in their mouth. They want to, that's really kind of how they get information about the world. It's a very rudimentary way of experiencing things, how things touch, how things taste, how things smell. And so they're constantly using that to kind of have this really early way of categorizing things, an early way of looking at the world. It's a very animalistic, very rudimentary way of processing the world. Transition in stages from reflexive to deliberate or intentional behavior, such as when you are investigating the world. Again, we come kind of hardwired with these survival instincts, these survival reflexes. And so during this stage, most people kind of transition away from the reflexive reactions to more deliberate, more intentional reactions. During the stage, we also develop something called object permanence. Object permanence is kind of the idea that when something goes out of sight, it doesn't stop existing. So like, if I were to take this phone and I were to put it behind my back and ask you, where's the phone? Most children 2 or 3 years of age who have graduated from this and developed object permanence will go around behind your back and look for it. They saw you put it back there, but a 1-year-old will do nothing. They aren't able to yet process that just because something is outside of their field of view, that doesn't mean that something ceases to exist altogether. So the idea that something continues to exist even when it's out of sight, that is object permanence. And object permanence is kind of the hallmark of the sensory motor stage. And once a child develops object permanence, the ability to understand that once something leaves your immediate field of view, it's still there. Once they develop that ability, they graduate from sensory motor and they move on to the next stage, which is the pre-operational stage. This occurs around 2 to 7 years of age. Thought in this stage is more symbolic than sensory motor. Sensory motor tends to be more reactionary. You clap your hands or something, and there's a startle reflex, and again, we still kind of have that idea there, but it comes from an entirely different mechanism. Things begin to represent each other. Children in this stage usually start expressing themselves. They start drawing, or they start writing, or they start representing things that they know. They cannot perform operations, which are mental representations that are reversible. So if you take a dollar bill and you fold it up into a paper airplane, where did the dollar bill go? That's an operation that is reversible. Most 4-year-olds are not able to unfold the airplane and realize that it's the same dollar bill. It has become something new. It is transformed into an airplane. That's called an operation. Now they can take that and they can unfold it and see that it's a dollar bill, but they can't do it in their mind and realize on a gut instinctual level that it's the same dollar bill. They also cannot grasp conservation. A good kind of idea of this is beakers. So let's say that you pour water into a beaker that's tall and thin. Okay, so now the water comes, the water level is about that high. Now you take it and you pour it into your bathtub, for example. Now the water level is about that high. You ask a 5-year-old which one has more water, and they will say the beaker. Almost every single time. unless you have a very intelligent 5-year-old. Even though they sit there and they watch you pour it from the beaker into the bathtub, they can't get over the idea that something that looks like it has more actually can have the same. Thought in this stage is inherently egocentric. They are unable to distinguish between their own perspective and that of another one. So they are literally very, very selfish, very self-centered. They're not able to, comprehend that, when they snatch the toy away from someone else, that person has feelings as well, and that person has now been denied the use of the toy. They just see something they want and they go after it because they can only think in terms of themselves. A lot of people never really graduate from that concept that they're unable to put themselves in the shoes of another. So that's why it's usually very important to teach children in this stage that sharing is very important. The other person's happiness matters as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to kind of get them used to the concept that other people are not there simply for their pleasure or to serve them. And again, this is a very rudimentary thing, but they're not yet able to process that other people also see the world the way that they do. Children in this stage may even credit inanimate objects with life and lifelike properties. This is called animism. So this is the kind of the idea that their stuffed animals might get lonely when they're at school all day. And so they'll bunch them all together so that they have friends and they don't miss the child nearly as much. That's animism. Pre-operational thought is also very intuitive, lacking in logic. 5-year-olds aren't really the sharpest tools in the shed. So they tend to react with their gut a lot if something feels right or something that they're not really able to think through the consequences of their actions. Most 5-6-year-olds are little daredevils. They're not afraid of anything because they literally aren't able to see that this could possibly result in my death or my injury. And they see something that looks fun and they will just run and sail right over the cliff. As we get older, we become very, very good at assessing threat levels and danger levels of certain things, and this might hurt if it goes wrong, and we're very able to imagine all the possible ways that it could theoretically in our imagination go wrong, and that kind of stops a lot of us from doing a lot of things that might make life a little bit more interesting. I will never go skydiving. That's just something that I have zero desire to do. I am very afraid of heights, and there's just no need for it because I can always, run through the long list of possible things that could go wrong that will result in my death. And it's just not worth it to me. I mean, the probability that those things would happen are very, very low. But nonetheless, that I can't really get over that initial gut reaction that this could result in my death, and so I've kind of harbored a phobia of heights. Most 5-year-olds don't have that unless they've been taught that by their parents. All right, third stage, concrete operational. This usually happens from around a 7 to 11. Thought in this stage becomes operational and intuitive. Reasoning is replaced by logical reasoning in concrete but not yet abstract situations. So they begin to be able to see and infer the consequences of their actions. So if they do this, then this might happen. But it's usually stuff that they have to try first. Everything is kind of done by trial and error. So if they take a bite of something green and they don't like it, it tastes bad, then they will be wary of every single thing that's green in the future. And so it's usually very hard to get 8, 9, 10-year-olds to eat their vegetables, for example, because they might have tried one time and they didn't like it, and so now they're very gun shy and very wary of anything that even closely resembles what they are. If you can get them to try it, and they might like that preparation, they might like spinach when they don't like broccoli, then they would be able to overcome that. But most children, good luck. Most children will fight that vehemently because, as far as they're concerned, it's the green things that are bad, not that particular green thing. They're able to think about the immediate consequences of their actions. So, again, this is done mostly by trial and error. So if they climb the slide and they fell off the last time, then they're going to be that much less likely to climb the slide and try it again and again and again, because the last time they did it, it hurt. Why should this time be any different? So they tend to be very, very rigid and very, very black and white, and it's either good or it's bad, it's right or it's wrong. There's no shades of gray. There's no middle ground. So they tend to be very set in their ways and very because they just yet don't possess the ability to think in terms of hypotheticals or think in terms of shades of gray. Sometimes lying is okay. Sometimes things like that, things that might that they might have been taught are bad, don't always have to be. You have to kind of take the situation into context. And a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old isn't really able to do that very well. Abstract thinking is not yet developed, so again, they're very concrete. They're very cut and dry. Everything is very, very rigid and categorized, and there's no deviation. There's no if something's wrong, it's always wrong. If something's good, it's always good, until something comes along that changes their mind. Excuse me. And then we have the formal operational. This begins around 11 to 15 and continues throughout adulthood. So 99% of people, beyond the age of 15 or 16 are well within formal operational thought. This is 11 to 15 years of age throughout adulthood. Thought in this stage is more abstract, idealistic, and logical than concrete operational thought. Again, they're able to think in terms of hypotheticals. They're able to think in terms of shades of gray. Most of us know that robbing a bank would not be a good idea, even though it would get us lots and lots of money. That money tends to be good, but the possible consequences of robbing the bank, getting caught and going to jail and ruining our lives, etc., 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 is not worth the risk. Is not worth the payoff for 99% of people walking the earth. So we that enabled us to kind of step back and control what we do and how we respond to certain things. We don't actually have to go rob a bank, get caught, and go to jail to know that is not a good place or a place that you want to be. You can hypotheticalize that this is not something that would turn out well for you, even though you've never done it. The chances that you would get caught and the chances that things would not be good and things would not work out are enough to actually curb that behavior in the vast majority of people. All right, the foundations of information processing. Okay, we're done with Piaget. Again, please let me know if there's anything in that section that doesn't make sense. Assimilation, accommodation are really, really kind of tough to get your mind around, especially if you've never experienced them before. So again, shoot me an email, please let me know, and I will do my best to explain it in a different way. All right, so information processing. Information processing approaches to cognitive development seek to identify the way that individuals take in, use, and store information. So much like Piaget, cognitive psychologists use information processing as a way to kind of map out and determine how people use and how people learn new things. So, some people might be visual learners. Some people might, be active learners. They have to actually try it and do it themselves in order to learn really how to do it. Some people can read it in a book and learn how to change a carburetor or whatever. Some people have to be shown. So, we each kind of internalize and take in new information in different ways. According to this approach, the quantitative changes in infants' abilities to organize and manipulate information represent the hallmarks of cognitive development. Taking this perspective, cognitive growth is characterized by increasing sophistication, speed, and capacity in processing information. So again, as you become more practiced in something, the easier it becomes to do. As you gain more experience and as you gain more knowledge about the world, you're able to kind of do a lot of things that perhaps you may not have been able to do before, simply just by observing it or thinking about it. And you're able to kind of compare that to things that are similar that you've done in the past, and you're able to kind of absorb that knowledge, and it makes a lot more sense to you. You know, some people are just mechanically inclined people. You know, they can look at a certain thing and take it apart and put it back together, and it just, you know, kind of has this intuitive gift. I am not like that at all. I know absolutely nothing about cars, and it all just looks like a bunch of metal and rubber and everything else. I wouldn't be able to even know where to begin. Even you could show me, you know, 3 or 4 times, and I'd probably be able to pick it up. But that intuitive, you know, mechanical knowledge and mechanical inclination that some people just have is beyond me. I just don't possess that. Some people are excellent writers out of the book. Some people are excellent chess players. Some people are you know, able to do math problems, and you know, some people are very emotionally expressive, and some people are very analytically expressive, and some people just inherently know how to cook, etc., etc., etc. So you know, this ability to kind of take something and run with it, and you know, hold on just a second, sorry. But kind of this ability to process one thing and have kind of this ease of information gathering is a very descriptive way. And so a good teacher or a good, you know, model, if you will, of how to do something will take all of that into account and will present the information in a way that the student or the apprentice is easiest able to process. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. Information processing approaches then focus on the types of mental programs that people use when they seek to solve problems. So how you process information, how you learn new things, whether you're visual or auditory or active, you have to learn. You have to do it yourself. That needs to be taken into account. And we all kind of inherently know how we learn best. All right, encoding, storage, and retrieval. Information processing has 3 basic aspects: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So anything you know, if you learn something, you have to be able to not only remember it, you have to be able to recall it, and you have to be able to act upon it and do that yourself. So encoding is the process by which information is initially recorded in a form usable to memory. So your initial exposure to something, your initial exposure to, you know, cooking scrambled eggs, you know, you might watch someone do it, you might read how to do it in a book, you might practice, you know, scrambling eggs, etc., etc., etc. But that has to be encoded, that has to be taken internal, and you have to commit that to memory. You know, you might try 15 different ways to scramble eggs and finally come across one that you like, or that your wife likes, or your husband likes, or your mom likes, or whoever. And you have to be able to remember which instances worked, what you did differently. So that's kind of the encoding process. You know, every time you read a book, or every time you see a movie, or every time you experience anything, you have to be able to encode that into your memory and be able to recall it at a later date. We encode selectively, picking and choosing the information to which we will pay the most attention. This is because we are exposed to such a massive amount of information that if we tried to attend to it all, we would be overwhelmed. Again, nature and evolution kind of helps us out in this regard to you know, things that are potentially threatening in our environment. I think we might have talked about that a little bit earlier. You know, if a waiter's carrying a tray of dishes back there, and all of a sudden he, you know, drops it and everything crashes, you know, then every person in the room will stop what they're doing, and automatically that attentive reflex kicks in, and we all kind of pay attention to that because that could potentially be something that's threatening. and the vast the vast amount of information that we are presented in our day-to-day lives is truly mind-boggling and overwhelming. So we have to kind of filter out, and we have to kind of pick and choose what we want to pay attention to. If we tried to pay attention to everything, we wouldn't be able to function at all. There's just so much that it just cannot be actively attended to. So a lot of what we experience is kind of done automatically, and is automatically processed by the brain, and we don't even really notice it or take too much effect to it. But if there's something going on in our environment that we do want to pay attention to, this is something that you really need to remember, or you need to pay attention to, or you're trying to learn a new skill or whatever, then we can kind of block everything else out, and we can pinpoint laser focus on that which we really want to pay attention to, and that again helps us be able to remember that. Storage refers to the placement of material into memory. Even if someone has been exposed to the information initially and has encoded it in an appropriate way, there is still no guarantee that he or she will be able to use it in the future. The information must also have been stored in memory adequately. So not only do you have to encode things, rearrange it in a way that makes sense and that you're able to kind of recall. So if you want to bake a cake, you have to follow the recipe steps in order, and you have to be able to encode that and come up with some kind of mnemonic or something like that enables you to kind of be able to store that in a meaningful way. And so you might come up with some kind of wordplay or some kind of memory trick that helps you remember the order in which things need to happen, because order is very, very important. You can't put the eggs in the oven before you mix it with the flour, etc., etc., etc. Finally, success in using the material in the future depends on retrieval. Retrieval is the process by which material in memory storage is located, brought into awareness, and used. So again, you have to encode it, you have to make it meaningful, and then you have to store it. You have to kind of figure out a way to put it in your mind to where you're able to remember that, and you're able to find that memory again when you need it. And that all has to do with retrieval. In some cases, encoding, storage, and retrieval are relatively automatic, while in others they are deliberate. Automatization is the degree to which an activity requires attention. So again, when you were first learning how to drive a car, for example, it was probably a much different experience than how you drive today, because it's something new and it's something that you're not really familiar or comfortable with. You're paying attention to every single little thing, and every single sensation, and all of that has to be again encoded and stored, so that when you get in the car the next time, you're able to replicate what you've learned and be able to do the exact same thing again in the future. Once you've practiced that 15,000 times, by the time you're 25 or 26, you don't even pay attention to it. It's automatic. So you get in, you just do the thing, and you don't really pay it a whole lot of attention. Your mind doesn't need to be completely obsessed with the steps in order to do that, because it's become just completely automatic. If you ever learn to fly an airplane, or you learn to square dance or anything like that, when you first learn how to do something, it requires a great deal of cognitive effort to be able to encode that and store it and retrieve it in a way that can be meaningful and useful to you when you try to do the thing again in the future. Otherwise, you haven't learned it. And once that stage of automatization is reached, then you can say to be practiced and familiar with it, and you can be good. Processes that require relatively little attention are automatic. Processes that require relatively large amounts of attention are controlled. Now, some things are just naturally difficult and naturally require a great deal of cognitive effort. And so no matter how many times you do brain surgery, you still need to focus and concentrate. That's not something that should be automatic. So that will always kind of be this controlled process where you're always paying attention, and everything really, for that instance, really kind of driving should kind of stay to a certain degree controlled. And people zone out, and people don't really pay attention. They're fiddling on their phones or they're fiddling on their radios because they don't really need to give it a whole lot of mental energy. But a lot of people are really kind of maybe too automatic in their driving or walking or whatever. Some people can't walk and look at their phones at the same time. So a lot of these things, even though they can be automatic, they should still be controlled. They should, we should still pay attention when we're driving. We should still pay attention when we're walking. We should still pay attention when we do brain surgery, etc. For example, some activities such as walking, eating with a fork, or reading may be automatic for you, but at first they required your full attention. This is what we were just talking about earlier. Infant intelligence. It is substantially more difficult to define and measure intelligence in infants than it is in adults. Again, infants can't talk to you. Infants can't tell you that they understand or they don't understand. So you kind of have to look at more of external behavioral cues. Even if an appropriate measure of intelligence is agreed upon, another issue presents itself. How well do measures of infant intelligence relate to eventual adult intelligence? Hold on just a second, please. Just because an infant may express certain measures of intelligence that we've developed for saying that a baby is successful at being a baby, that doesn't mean that that's going to translate into later adult intelligence, where we can measure that an adult is very good at being an adult. A developmental quotient is an overall developmental score that relates to performance in 4 domains: motor skills such as balance and sitting, language skills, adaptive behavior such as alertness and exploration, and personal social such as feeding and dressing oneself. So these are kind of agreed upon factors that measure infant intelligence. These are kind of markers of how good a baby is at being a baby. The roots of language. Language is a systematic, meaningful arrangement of symbols and provides the basis for communication. So language is enormously complex. There's lots of little things that go into it, and much like driving or walking or anything else, when you first learn a new language, it takes a great deal of controlled effort. We have to practice. We have to get familiar with it. But once you're familiar with it, most of us don't really even pay a whole lot of attention to the roots of language and what goes into conveying and what goes into communication, because we've done it so many times that it's now become automatic. Language has several formal characteristics that must be mastered as linguistic competence is developed. So as we learn to speak and as we become better and better at communicating and expressing ourselves, we kind of become richer and more diverse in our ability to express what it is that we want to say. These 3 things are phonology, morphemes, and semantics. Phonology refers to the basic sounds of language called phonemes that can be combined to produce words and sentences. The A in mat and the A in mate represent 2 different phonemes, 2 different ways that A sounds. And, the being able to differentiate the A in mat and the A in mate and be able to say it correctly can help you communicate more effectively. If you haven't yet grasped that and you don't really understand the different phonemes, the different sounds of A in mat and mate, then you may say mat, but you actually mean mate. And so learning how to process that and learning how to categorize those and being able to express them and learning the differences between those is a very fundamental, important part of being able to speak and being able to communicate effectively. A morpheme is the smallest language unit that has meaning. Some morphemes are complete words, while others add information necessary for interpreting a word, such as the endings S for plural and ED for past tense. So study is one example. Studies is another morpheme that means something completely different. And studied means, again, something else completely different. and learning the individual morphemes and how, even these small little subsets, even could be even just a single letter added to the end or the beginning of a word, can completely change its meaning. Semantics are the rules that govern the meaning of words and sentences. As their knowledge of semantics develops, children are able to understand the subtle distinction between Ellie was hit by a ball and a ball hit Ellie. So how the sentences are arranged and the order of the words in them can completely change the meaning of the sentence entirely. And, again, most of us are so familiar and practiced in English that we don't even really think about that. Although there are still a whole lot of people in the world who struggle with putting together, a coherent sentence. But the semantics are kind of, what makes a good sentence and what makes a not good sentence. And sometimes, if you rearrange the words in a sentence, you might be trying to, convey one thing, but the way that you've constructed, semantically constructed the sentence actually conveys the entire opposite meaning. Pre-linguistic communication is communication through sounds, facial expressions, gestures, imitation, and other non-linguistic means. The most obvious manifestation of pre-linguistic communication is babbling, making speech-like but meaningless sounds. This starts around the age of 2 or 3 months and continues until around the age of 1 year. So, they may hear you say things and make noises, and they may try to imitate that, but they haven't yet developed the ability to, understand meaning from what we say to them. And so they just kind of make noises with their mouth, and it's really gibberish. It's adorable, but it's gibberish nonetheless. The first words in children's early vocabularies typically regard objects and things, both animate and inanimate. These first words are often holophrases, one-word utterances that stand for a whole phrase whose meaning depends on the particular context in which they are used. Such as ma can mean where's mom, or pick me up ma, or, anything like that. So they kind of just, it's a very rudimentary way of communicating. Cookie, may mean, I want a cookie, this cookie is good, this cookie is not good, etc., etc., etc. But this abrupt, very short, very non-descriptive way of communicating is usually, the very first seedlings of them beginning to start talking. Infants also tend to leave out words that aren't critical to the message, similar to the way we might write a telegram for which we were paying by the word. This is referred to as telegraphic speech. My shoes on, or I want pony, or all of these things that don't really, they're not very flowery linguists. Children tend to really, again, be very cut and dry, to the point, very blunt. Lady fat or whatever, and that they don't pepper it, they don't flower up the language or pepper it with a whole bunch of other fluff. They're very direct and that type of thing. Infants also show individual differences in the style of language that they use. Some use what's called a referential style, in which language is used primarily to label objects, cookie, ground, dog, whatever. Others tend to use an expressive style, in which language is used mainly to express feelings and needs about oneself or others, such as sick or hurt or happy or yum or things like that. And so how a child uses uses language, again, becomes much more developed and much more expressive as they get older. But when they're younger, it's a much more rudimentary, much more it's better than babbling or better than crying. You're still able to kind of get within the neighborhood, if you will, but sometimes it's a little difficult to discern what it is that they want or what they mean. All right, so that's the 4th chapter. I'm going to work on getting this uploaded, and I will send out an announcement as well with a link to this content. So hopefully you guys can get this up and ready. May not have the 5th chapter by Tuesday, but I will go ahead and upload your exam on Tuesday if you would like that done, and go ahead and get kind of a head start on it. We'll make the exam due, let's have it due Friday by 11:59 p.m. So you need to upload that to Canvas. I will post it to Canvas in the under the one module. So make sure that you upload that, and I don't know if you kind of have to attach it to that. I think you're able to just directly upload the Word document or the PDF, your choice. But again, I will explain a little bit more of that in the next video. But I should have that up hopefully today, maybe tomorrow. But I will definitely get that second video, get Chapter 5 up by Tuesday. This first section is the longest. So I think the second section has 4 chapters in it. And I doubt we'll get much past that second section, just because this has been kind of a short semester, and I don't want to just completely bombard you with information. It would take us a week to a week and a half to go through these lectures in class anyway. So in reality we're really kind of almost ahead of schedule. I think this is the 3rd or 4th week that we've had class. We started October 15th, so October 19th, maybe something like that. So it's been 3 or 4 weeks. So that's giving us a week per lecture, which I think is very adequate. We wouldn't be doing these every single day. But again, if you have any questions over this chapter is probably the most difficult to kind of wrap your head around and understand that we go through. So please shoot me an email, let me know. Your exams are all going to be open book, open notes, so I don't foresee anyone making less than an A in this class at the end. It's just with things how they are, and the state of the country, and coronavirus cases are spiking. We're now at the highest level we have been yet. It's even worse than when the state was shut down. A lot of governors are re-rolling out new lockdown procedures. So this is gonna be with us for a while. I don't think it's worth it to come up to campus and increase exposure. I don't know if your other professors are having classes on campus. I would be very surprised if they were. But I just don't think it's worth the risk. Especially with so many cases. I think we're up to like 100,000 per day or something like that. It's just maybe it's, it might be 100,000 per day, something like that. Maybe 10,000 per day. I can't remember. That seems pretty high. But yeah, this is going to be with us for a while, and people are dying from it. So stay safe out there. Keep in mind that this is something that we're all going through. So again, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, get with me, let me know. And your exam is still going to be posted on Tuesday. It'll be open note, open book. I can't stop you from using your notes. So it should be relatively easy, and you guys should just really sail through this content. All right, that's it. So I will get this uploaded, and that will be that. All right, so be on the lookout for the 5th set of notes as well. It should be up either tonight or tomorrow. Today's Sunday, so hopefully Monday or Tuesday at the latest. All right, have a good night. Talk to you later.